"You're ungrateful, and you'll never be good enough for this family," my mom said. The words stung, but I kept my face neutral, not allowing a single tear to slip. I'm Emily Carter, 32 years old, and I've worked my entire life to prove that I could make something of myself without anyone's help. Yet, here I was, hearing those very words from the people who should have been proud of me. My parents, the people who I thought would always have my back, now turned their backs on me the moment I started succeeding. It wasn't the first time they made me feel like my accomplishments were meaningless, but this time felt different, sharper. I had just landed the promotion I'd worked for over the past 5 years. It wasn't a huge leap, but it was mine. And yet, to them, it didn't matter. My mom, sitting across from me, her face a mask of disappointment, looked at me like I had betrayed her. As if all my hard work, the countless nights I spent studying, working overtime, and sacrificing everything for my career, meant nothing. "You didn't get here on your own. We've given you everything," she continued, her voice laced with venom. She never understood. She never saw the long hours I spent building my career from scratch, nor the sacrifices I made. To her, I was still the little girl who needed saving. To her, I owed everything to her and my father. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just upset with me for not following their expectations. No, it was deeper. They were jealous. They were bitter that I had achieved something they could never fully take credit for. And it wasn't just my career they wanted to take credit for. It was everything. "Your success is ours too," my dad chimed in, his voice dripping with entitlement. He smiled like he had just handed me the key to success, as if I hadn't earned it myself. That's when I realized they never cared about my happiness. They only cared about how my success reflected on them. The fact that I had done it all on my own, without their help, without their interference, was something they couldn't handle. They wanted credit for everything, even my independence. My hands clenched under the table, but I said nothing. I just sat there, staring at them, processing the fact that they never saw me as an individual, but as a tool for their own validation. And as I left their house that night, my heart a little heavier than before, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I would let them take credit for my life. As the days passed, I couldn't shake off the feeling that my parents' words had been more than just hurtful, they had been a warning. A warning that no matter how much I achieved, no matter how far I went, it would never be enough for them. I had worked hard to get where I was, but it seemed like they couldn't see that. Every success felt like it was theirs too. But I wasn't going to let them control my life, not anymore. I started distancing myself from them, not just physically, but emotionally. I had to. Their expectations were suffocating me, and their jealousy was too much to bear. Every phone call, every visit felt like a reminder that I wasn't doing enough in their eyes. One afternoon, I finally broke down and called my best friend, Olivia. I hadn't told her much about my family, but I needed someone to talk to. "What's going on? You sound off," Olivia said, her voice laced with concern. I didn't want to drag her into my mess, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. "It's my parents," I began, my voice cracking. They don't see me. All the hard work, all the late nights, the sacrifices. They think I owe them everything. And now they want to take credit for my success. It's like I'm not even allowed to have something of my own." Olivia was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's messed up. You've worked so hard for everything. You don't owe them anything." Her words were a comfort, but they didn't make the hurt go away. I couldn't help but feel that all my life, I had been shaped by their expectations, by their constant need to be the ones who made everything happen. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how toxic this relationship had become. I had spent so many years trying to please them, trying to show them that I was worthy of their love and approval. But in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. I was no longer just Emily, their daughter. I was Emily, the one who had to prove herself over and over again. I wasn't even sure if they ever really saw me, or if I was just the person they needed me to be. That evening, I sat in front of my computer, staring at the screen but not really seeing anything. My thoughts kept racing back to that moment, when they took my success and made it their own. And I knew that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. The following week, things only got worse. I had barely spoken to my parents since our last argument, but their constant presence loomed over me. I knew I had to take control of the situation, but I wasn't sure where to start. It was clear that no matter what I did, they would never see me as enough. One evening, I decided to take a step I had been putting off for months. I would confront them. It was time to have a real conversation about what was happening between us, about their need to claim credit for everything I had worked for, and about how it was suffocating me. I called my mom, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. "Hey, Mom," I said when she picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" There was a long pause on the other end. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, wondering if she had done something wrong. She finally answered, her voice cautious. "Of course, Em. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last time we talked. And I need to tell you how I'm feeling. I've worked so hard for everything I have, but it feels like you and Dad are trying to take that away from me. You're acting like none of it matters unless you're part of it." There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing softly, probably unsure of how to respond. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what you mean, sweetheart. We're just proud of you. We want to be a part of your success." Her words felt hollow, like she was trying to justify something she knew wasn't right. "I don't need you to be part of it, Mom," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I need you to acknowledge that I did this on my own. I need you to stop taking credit for everything I've done. I didn't get here because of you and Dad. I got here because of my own hard work." Another pause. The silence was deafening, but I knew I had to keep going. "I'm tired of feeling like my success is only valuable if it makes you look good. It's not about you. It's about me. I've done everything I can to make you proud, but I'm done doing it for you. I need to do it for me." When she finally spoke again, her voice was different. It was softer, almost like she was seeing things from my perspective for the first time. "I didn't realize you felt that way, she said quietly. "I'm sorry." The words didn't heal everything, but for the first time, I felt like I was being heard. I had set boundaries, and I wasn't backing down. It wasn't just about a career or a promotion. It was about taking back control of my life. It was time to stop letting them define me. The conversation with my mom didn't fix everything, but it did something I hadn't expected. It made me realize how long I had been burying my own voice in the hope of making them proud. For years, I had been trying to be what they wanted me to be: smart, successful, obedient, and in doing so, I lost who I truly was. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore or the credit they tried to steal from me. It was about reclaiming my life, my choices, my future. The next few days were strange. I could feel the tension between us, but there was also something different in the air. My mom didn't call me as often, and when she did, it was less about expectations and more about checking in. For once, it felt like we were having a real conversation. But even as the awkwardness began to fade, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to keep living my life just to please them. But the realization that I had been living for them hit harder than I expected. I started thinking back to all the little moments when I had compromised, when I had put my own happiness aside just to make them happy. There were the times when I had skipped social events, the times I had ignored friends' calls, the times I had said yes to everything they asked, even when it meant sacrificing my own plans. I had allowed them to control my narrative for so long, and now I was left with the aftermath. The question was, how could I break free from this? How could I finally live life on my own terms? That night, I sat on my couch, staring out the window. The city lights twinkled below, but all I could see were the ghosts of my past choices. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I had spent years shaping myself into the person my parents wanted, but now I needed to figure out who I really was. The thought terrified me, but it also excited me. I could feel the weight of it all lifting, just a little bit. I knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments where I'd question if I was doing the right thing. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace the unknown. I wasn't going to let my parents, or anyone, define who I was anymore. It was time to take control of my own narrative. The following week, I began to take the first steps in this new chapter of my life. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was terrifying. But with each passing day, I felt a little more like myself. I knew the journey wasn't going to be smooth, and there would be moments when I would second-guess myself, but I was finally on my own path. One of the hardest parts of this change was facing the reality that my parents might never fully understand. They were so accustomed to controlling the narrative, to having their expectations dictate my actions, that they might never accept the new me. And I was okay with that. As I walked through the city on a sunny afternoon, something in me shifted. I had always found comfort in the noise of the city, the honking horns, the chatter of strangers, the rush of people walking past, but now it felt different. It felt like freedom. I wasn't bound by anyone's expectations, and that thought hit me harder than I expected. The weight I had carried for so many years was lifting, and with it came a strange mix of excitement and fear. I knew I had made the right decision. No more pretending to be someone I wasn't. No more saying yes when I meant no. No more putting everyone else's needs before my own. But as I continued on my walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had all this freedom, but what did I want to do with it? What did I want my life to look like now that I wasn't living for anyone else? That night, I sat down with a cup of tea and a notebook, something I hadn't done in a long time. I started writing down everything I wanted to achieve, not for anyone else, but for myself. It felt good to let my thoughts flow freely. No expectations, no judgments, just me and my dreams. For the first time in a long time, I realized I had been so focused on making everyone happy that I had forgotten to make myself happy. It was time to change that. It was time to put myself first. The next morning, I called in sick to work. For the first time in ages, I wasn't going to rush through my day. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Instead, I spent the day doing what I loved. I went to the park, read a book, and even took a long nap. It was simple, but it was mine. And as I lay in bed that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. For the first time, I wasn't chasing someone else's dream. I was chasing my own. It had been a few weeks since I made the decision to take control of my life, and each day felt like a new beginning. I was starting to realize that the freedom I had gained was more than just a break from my parents' expectations. It was an opportunity to redefine who I was. I no longer felt the pressure to constantly prove myself to anyone. For the first time, I was allowing myself to just be. But as much as I enjoyed this newfound freedom, I couldn't ignore the guilt that still lingered deep inside me. It wasn't just about my parents anymore. It was about my entire life, the choices I had made, and the relationships I had built. I started to wonder if I had abandoned everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. One afternoon, I decided to take a trip to the beach. I hadn't been in months, and the thought of the ocean and the quiet was exactly what I needed. I packed my bag, grabbed my favorite book, and drove to the coast. As I sat on the sand, the cool breeze brushing my face, I realized how much I had been holding in. My life had been so focused on other people's needs that I had forgotten to listen to my own. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was calming, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to just breathe. I let my thoughts drift, not with worry or guilt, but with a sense of peace. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't owe anyone anything. I wasn't trying to live up to anyone's expectations anymore. As I closed my eyes and listened to the ocean, I thought about what I wanted from this new chapter. I wanted to feel fulfilled. I wanted to build relationships that were based on mutual respect and love, not obligation. I wanted to pursue my own passions and dreams, without the fear of disappointing anyone. The world was so much bigger than the narrow path I had been following. And that day, as I sat by the water, I made a promise to myself. I would live for me, not for anyone else. I would no longer let the fear of judgment or rejection hold me back. It was time to step into the future I had always dreamed of, the one that had been waiting for me all along. I didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but for the first time, I felt excited about the possibilities. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. I found myself doing things I had never given myself permission to do before. I signed up for a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had put off for years. I started cooking more, experimenting with new recipes, and actually enjoying the process instead of seeing it as another chore to tick off. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living for myself. But even as I embraced this new chapter, I couldn't shake the thought of my parents. They hadn't called in a while, and I started to wonder if they were upset about our conversation. I told myself that I couldn't keep worrying about what they thought, but deep down, there was still a part of me that wanted their approval. I decided to reach out to them. It had been almost a month since I had last spoken to them, and I figured it was time to check in. I dialed my mom's number and waited for her to pick up. When she did, her voice was softer than I expected. "Hey, Em. How are you?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it felt like a turning point. I hadn't expected this level of warmth from her, especially after everything that had happened. "I'm doing good, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I've been busy with some new things, trying out some hobbies. How about you?" There was a pause before she responded. "We've been fine," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about what you said. And, well, I just want you to know I'm proud of you, Em. I may not have understood before, but I see now that you've been doing things on your own. And that's something." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to brush it off, but I knew this was an important moment. "Thanks, Mom," I said, my voice a little shaky. "It means a lot to hear that." There was a silence between us, not uncomfortable, just different. It felt like we were both realizing that the dynamic between us was changing, and maybe, just maybe, we were both okay with that. "I know we've had our issues, but I want you to know that I'm here," my mom said. Her voice was different now, more open, more accepting. "I love you, Em. And I just want you to be happy." Hearing those words from her felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. "I love you too, Mom," I replied, feeling a warmth in my chest. "And I'm working on being happy." For the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The following days felt like a gentle shift in my life, the kind of change that happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, but when you look back, you realize how much has changed. I spent more time focusing on myself, on my goals, and on the things that truly made me happy. It felt strange at first, this new version of myself that was no longer bound by others' expectations. But the more I embraced it, the more natural it felt. I even started thinking about my future, about what I wanted to do next. The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to take risks. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to take a day trip to a nearby town I'd always wanted to visit. I'd been putting it off for years, always saying I didn't have the time. But now, time didn't seem like an excuse anymore. I packed a small bag, grabbed my camera, and hit the road. The drive was quiet, and I found myself thinking about all the moments that led me here, to this place of peace and self-acceptance. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but I was ready to find out. When I arrived at the town, the streets were quiet, and there was a peaceful stillness in the air. I wandered through the local market, taking in the sights and sounds, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. I realized that it wasn't about achieving more or meeting other people's standards anymore. It was about finding happiness in the small moments, in the things that made me feel alive. I spent the afternoon exploring the town, taking pictures of everything that caught my eye: the colorful storefronts, the old buildings, the little cafes that smelled of freshly brewed coffee. It felt freeing, this act of doing something just for me, without worrying about what anyone else thought. As the sun began to set, I sat on a bench overlooking the town square, watching as the sky turned pink and orange. I took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wasn't trying to be anyone else, and I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to take it one step at a time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences and emotions. Every day felt like a step forward, but also a reminder of how much I had been holding myself back. I started taking small risks, things I would have once avoided because I feared disappointing others or making a mistake. But now, those things didn't matter anymore. I was living for myself. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to take a different route home. It was something I would have never done before, always sticking to the familiar path. But today, I wanted something new. The streets looked different, more vibrant, even though I was still in the same city. I passed by a cafe I had never noticed before, the smell of fresh pastries and coffee drawing me in. I paused, then walked in. The warm glow inside made me smile, and I realized how much I had been missing out on by always playing it safe. I sat down with my coffee, looking around at the people, the conversations, the laughter. It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I wasn't holding myself back because I was afraid of judgment or failure. For once, I was allowing myself to just exist, to enjoy the small things. That night, I called my mom. It had been a while since we had a real conversation. I wanted to share my experiences with her, but I was nervous. I wasn't sure how she would react to the changes in me. "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice a little hesitant. "I've been doing some new things lately." There was a pause, and then she responded, "Like what?" Her tone was curious, not judgmental. I told her about the cafe, the classes I had signed up for, and how I had been stepping out of my comfort zone. I was waiting for her to criticize me, to ask why I hadn't been more focused on work, or why I wasn't doing what she thought I should be doing. But instead, she said, "That sounds nice, Em. I'm glad you're doing things for yourself." Those words, simple as they were, hit me harder than I expected. I realized that maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to see me for who I was, not who she wanted me to be. I wasn't asking for approval, but it felt good to know she wasn't trying to hold me back anymore. As I hung up the phone, I smiled to myself. It was small, but it was a step in the right direction. I was no longer defined by their expectations. I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be. As the weeks went by, I began to realize how much I had changed. I was becoming someone I had always wanted to be but never allowed myself to be. I was no longer afraid of standing up for myself, of making decisions based on what was right for me, not what was expected of me. My relationships with people started shifting too. I found myself surrounded by people who truly supported me, not because they needed something from me, but because they appreciated who I was. I felt lighter, more at peace, and it made me realize how much I had been holding onto the past, trying to please people who would never be satisfied. It was a Saturday afternoon when I ran into an old friend, Sarah. We had grown close back in college, but we lost touch after I became so consumed with my career and family obligations. It had been years since we last spoke, and seeing her again felt like a step back into a life I had long forgotten. We sat at a small cafe, catching up on everything we had missed in each other's lives. She asked about my family, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to lie or make excuses. "Things with my parents are complicated," I said, my voice steady but cautious. "But I'm learning to set boundaries. I'm focusing on what makes me happy now." Sarah smiled at me, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'm really proud of you, Em. You've always been strong, but it sounds like you're finally living for yourself." Her words, simple as they were, meant more to me than I realized. For so long, I had been chasing approval, seeking validation from everyone around me. But now, I was finally allowing myself to be enough. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't have all the answers, but I was learning to trust myself. After our conversation, I walked back to my apartment with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It was clear now that I had been holding myself back, afraid of rejection, afraid of making mistakes. But now, I wasn't scared anymore. I knew that no matter what happened with my parents, no matter how things played out, I would always have myself. And that was enough. The world felt bigger, brighter, and full of possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it with confidence, with strength, and with the belief that I could create my own happiness, without needing anyone's approval to make it real. As I continued down this path of self-discovery, I found myself reflecting on just how much had changed. It wasn't just the big moments, the ones where I stood up for myself or made a bold decision. It was the small, everyday shifts that had become the most meaningful. I wasn't rushing through life anymore. I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone. It felt like I was truly living, for the first time, without the weight of others' expectations hanging over me. I began to realize that the work I had done on myself wasn't just about overcoming my parents' expectations, but about learning to trust myself. For years, I had been conditioned to think that their approval was the only thing that mattered. But now I knew better. I was the one who had to approve of myself first and foremost. That realization was freeing. The relationship with my parents was still complex. They still had their expectations, their beliefs about what I should be doing with my life, but I was no longer allowing their opinions to dictate my actions. I learned to set boundaries, to speak up when I needed to, and most importantly, to walk away when it was necessary. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt guilty for not meeting their expectations, moments when I questioned if I was making the right choice. But those moments were fewer and farther between. I had begun to trust myself. I had begun to live for me. One evening, I sat down at my desk, my thoughts racing with everything that had changed over the past few months. I realized that this journey wasn't just about reclaiming my independence, but about rediscovering who I truly was. The person I had become was strong, confident, and unapologetically herself. I wasn't the person I thought I had to be for others. I was the person I had always been, just hidden beneath layers of doubt and fear. As I sat there, I smiled to myself. I had come a long way, and there was still so much more ahead. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it all. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I wasn't afraid of what others thought. I was finally free, and that freedom was mine to own. The changes in my life weren't just external, they were internal as well. I realized that for so long, I had been living in a state of constant conflict, torn between who I was and who I thought I needed to be for others. It had been exhausting, trying to meet expectations that never seemed to be enough, trying to please people who never fully understood me. But as I stood at this crossroads, I could finally see the path ahead, clear and unclouded. I had spent years seeking validation from my parents, from my colleagues, from friends. But I now understood that the only validation I needed was my own. It wasn't about achieving more or fitting into a mold. It was about embracing who I was and what I wanted out of life. I thought about the days when I had felt so trapped, so unsure of myself. Now, every step felt like freedom. It was in the small things, the way I no longer hesitated to say no when I needed to, the way I made time for things that made me happy, even if it meant disappointing someone else. The more I trusted myself, the more I realized how much power I had over my own life. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes anymore. I wasn't afraid of the unknown. If anything, I welcomed it. I started setting new goals, goals that were based on what I truly wanted, not on what anyone else expected of me. I decided to start my own project, something that I had always dreamed of but never thought I could do. It wasn't about success in the traditional sense, it was about creating something that was purely mine. As I worked on it, I realized that this was what I had been missing all along, a sense of ownership over my own story. I wasn't just going through the motions of life anymore. I was living it fully and unapologetically. As time went on, I began to see the fruits of my labor. Not just in terms of achievements, but in the way I felt about myself. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. I was enough just as I was. And for the first time in my life, I could truly say I was happy, not because of what I had, but because of who I had become.